I'll turn it on. Okay. Sorry, Bella.
So, my question is why the yoga studios are treated as categorically different from like a sports club or something, which I think martial arts, um, uh, like martial arts practices were included in the category of like sports clubs in this paper. So my question was basically what sets yoga apart from these other um, sort of clubs that are also compared to um, like the churches in terms of geographic placement.
No, that's an excellent background question. And in fact, we spent a lot of time measuring and getting precise answers to that, which is really in the Scenescapes book, as well as some of the work that Joseph and Dan Silver have done in collaboration. That I can let maybe Joseph respond to that, but let's pause for a minute if any others have some questions to feed in, because I mean that's a great, it's a very central question, and it links with all kinds of other things which are currently being discussed ideologically. That is inequality, egalitarianism, and where and how they variously um, work in a positive or negative manner in association with things like martial arts versus yoga. Um, who else wants to fold in with something? I will remind what I said very briefly in the introduction, that Joseph He and I spent almost a year working on the syllabus for this course together, and it was exciting because the whole field was as messy as it was, but also was linked with the arrival in Chicago, University of Chicago, of Saskia Sassen. So she and I did a couple of workshops, and we ended up creating this course because it was really an alternative to her general perspective, which was basically to see the world as an entity and a top-down kind of set of activities. And globalization was successful for those cities like London, Tokyo, and New York, which had connections with Wall Street, with markets, with investors, with connectors. It's an economically driven model, which she in that sense she built on the the earlier work of the 20th century, which basically came from Lenin, that is, of talking of global capitalism. And she doesn't cite Lenin, she doesn't cite it in those terms, but that was really her top down in the way that this was moving in a smooth direction. But she then took from Marx the sense of inequality, and how much inequality may be heightened, or indeed, she suggested, measured as it had, as in the data which she had for especially New York, that the numbers of people coming into New York increasing as chauffeurs, as nannies, as chefs, for the most affluent, um, were heightening the inequality of global cities like New York, and which could thus be seeing um, much going further with the globalization of the world. Okay, I mean that's the kind of argument which she makes in her book. And so these issues are continuing to be debated and discussed. So we created this course as an alternative. That is, let me add what's the big alternative. Instead of ignoring a nation, a city with its specific history, its culture, its dynamics, how is New York different from LA, or different from Paris, or different from others, and why? And so the substantive topics which we've cut into that we've structured in the propositions and in the sections of the course, which are basically similar to what we did with Joseph. We've added a couple of sections, but the core ideas in those propositions, we struggled to codify this whole messy field. And I'll just mention that we won a prize for this simple syllabus because Urban and other people working on globalization were looking for ways to teach courses, and you know, and the field was so big and wide and messy that we have a framework which we're continuing to elaborate with the scenes work. To come back to Bella's question, let me start and then Joseph can elaborate with much more detail and with anything else that he wants to. But it's a good entree, in that I mentioned Joseph, Dan Silver, some of the others were linked with Donald Levine, who had been dean of the college and active in the sociology department. And as well as with martial artists. And he was active in international organizations of having sunrise ceremonies with martial arts activities and so forth. So such that this personally engaged several folks. We worked together and included Joseph and Dan Silver worked on some papers, and some of that is summarized in the Scenescapes book. But just the one theme which we'll link it with Bella, and then let Joseph take this in whatever direction he likes, as this is framing his entree as it's not simply an introduction. He has helped to create and change the field that in this course. So I'm delighted that we're able to get him be our surprise visitor on short notice, and it worked out with his schedule. One issue thus is inequality, and where and how might globalization, whether inspired by Lenin or by Adam Smith, or as the extent of the market in the Adam Smith terms, or the weakening of tradition, the weakening of the agriculture, the heightening of industrial capitalism as the Leninist, or there was a group at LA and so forth, and then others, of course, in Paris, thought in these terms. What we did was in part to look more closely at some of the specific things which are sometimes termed industrial categories, things like martial arts or sports clubs, or should we put together sports clubs or martial arts? And the third one, which you critically mentioned, is yoga. That is, these look similar, and they may have been put together in some categories of the census or some other kinds of ways of classifying amenities. But one thing which we did, which was different, was instead of saying we know that globalization or Wall Street is generating this, instead, let's say, between Wall Street and where people who work on Wall Street go home, they may choose to stop at a martial arts club or to go to a Soko Gakkai temple. That is, they may be doing other things which are shaping their whole views as to whether the consumption of having a fancy limousine and a chauffeur is a good, normal thing, or whether it's irresponsible, crass materialism. And those intervening variables we looked at, and in particular, we can't have everything about all of their activities, but we had several hundred of these kinds of categories, and we looked at those which were associated with people who live in neighborhoods measured either as zip codes or in different. We've repeated that with different studies and in different countries, different data sources, but But the idea is to which things like yoga is one extreme, which we found, versus martial arts. Yoga, at least with the US and Canadian data, was heavily more concentrated in those neighborhoods with high income folks, and in ways that the uh, uh, your martial arts were the total opposite. Martial arts, and the other thing which we came up with, which we've also studied, is popular music, popular culture. Um, the move that, let's say, some of the movies, some of the the cartoons that used to be in newspapers, um, the let's say much of the music which could be rock, rap, um, was generally termed popular culture. Let's say in the old days, let's say like the 60s, through the 60s and into the 70s. Around the 70s, getting into the 80s, we began to say, hey, maybe the popular and elite culture are not such appropriate categories, but the related concern with inequality of income was something which is continued. And so the interesting finding was that popular culture and martial arts were associated, were definitely stronger in those neighborhoods across the US which had more high income versus more diversity. And so more diversity or more lower income being active uh, is what leads into, if you will, the distinctiveness as a strategic research site for studying martial arts. But I've said enough, maybe more than necessary, to lead into Joseph. It's great to have him here. I've told you why, he's what important contributions he's made. And Joseph, why don't you take your time to deal with what you want about this, even mentioning the struggles around some of the political science or people is fine to mention in passing, at least maybe not too much, but you've got wonderful stories to tell, and I'm eager and pleased to have you participating with us now.
Okay,
Joseph,
thank you,
Joseph
Professor. Okay, hello everyone. Thank you, Professor Clark, for those nice remarks. If possible, if you can all turn your video on and video and audio on, that way it's nice to see who I'm talking to. Okay,
That's great.
all
Good,
right.
good
So if
idea.
you're able, please turn your video on so we can all see each other, make it kind of like a small discussion. Uh, my son is actually starting Carleton College this past year, and I hear it's like the nicer, just as cold, but like a little warmer version of University of Chicago, right? So I'm happy that my second son is studying in the Midwest. Okay, so my name's Joseph E, and then I was a student of Professor Clark long time ago, and then um, before I give my theoretical contributions, I wanted to say like a little bit about my background. I was born in Korea. I immigrated to America when I was 8. And then I think as a social scientist, I'm very sensitive to my surroundings. And then I see like problems, and then it makes me wonder, like, I try to understand why the world works this way and how to make it better. And so when I was a student at the University of Chicago, I noticed there's so much kind of like, social division, right? Between like class and racial, socioeconomic divisions. And I was wondering, like, why do we have these divisions? And, what are some organizations that can overcome them? And so I saw two organizations that work really hard to overcome social divisions, and they were churches and martial arts schools. Historically, churches were America's most important civil society organization that brought people from all different walks of life and different classes. And one of the reasons for America's polarization is that our traditional organizations no longer provide that bridging role. So traditional fraternal and religious organizations do not connect people like they used to. And so my question was, then what are alternatives? Okay, so if evangelical or mainstream Christian churches would not connect, if they don't connect different races and different classes in Hyde Park, what other organizations do? And then I saw like the martial arts school. I think some of you are familiar with Fitzgerald's martial arts. They have a chapter in University of Chicago. It's on 55th Street. I think they're still going strong. Has anyone seen the Tangsudo studio, Fitzgerald's martial arts on 55th Street? Okay, and if they're still around. And then it's really, for me, it was remarkable because it was the only institution where I saw like a lot of, African American kids, all different classes, and they're all united because they're all yelling in Korean, like "Tiro Dora," okay? That means turn around. So you have all these like mostly African American children who are being taught by a white instructor, who in turn pledges loyalty to his Korean sabunim, his Korean master. And so look, and you had people not only different classes, but also you had University of Chicago students and professors who are very like socially progressive. So they would never attend church, right? But then they would do the martial arts. Okay. And so martial arts brought together, progressives who don't go to church, and also conservatives who would not do yoga for different reasons. And so it bridged the divide. And so from this example, kind of like inductive method, I derived the theory of this kind of like Rousseau. He talked about the alien lawgiver, right? And so I made a theoretical argument that organizations that combines this kind of outsider framing with internal hierarchy are more likely to bring different people than organizations that lack such combinations. So you need to be framed as both an outsider. You're neither black or white, you're neither conservative nor progressive. And also you need a strong like organizational hierarchy. There's a clear chain of command. And when you combine those two, then you can connect different races, different classes into a shared sense of community. And so that was my book, God and Karate in the South Side. And then Dan Silver and I, we connected, and so we confirmed this empirically. So Dan Silver and I, we downloaded Yellow Page data, and then we found out that I think this was addressing Bella's question, right? Why is yoga different from martial arts and sports? And so we found out that if you look at like Yellow Page neighborhood data, like churches, especially evangelical churches and yoga studios, are distributed very differently. Okay, and so Bella, so think of evangelical churches. Do you think there'd be more in like less educated or more educated neighborhoods?
I would think they'd be targeting more low educated neighborhoods to
Sure,
try and get converts or something.
right. And more white or less white?
Less white.
Right. And yoga studios? Probably the right.
Yeah, the more affluent college educated areas.
Right. So it's like the opposite, right? Uh, and so there's spatial polarization. Okay. But then we found that martial arts and other organizations that are framed as just pop culture, it framed the two. So you have martial arts that are, distributed in both, white, more white, less white, more educated, less educated. So does that make sense, Bella? How martial arts might be framed differently than yoga?
Yeah. So yeah. My main question there was why yoga specifically was differentiated from like all of those other
Hmm.
like leisure activity oriented like activities you can do. And so you're saying that like the reason is because of that geographic spread where each of them are.
Well, the key determinant is framing, how something is framed, right?
Okay.
So like yoga, martial arts are very simple. They share many similar traits. For example, like martial arts is also spiritual as a sense, chi, right? Okay, this kind of inner energy. But martial arts for some reason in America, it's not framed as a spiritual alternative to Christianity, but yoga is, Buddhism is.
Interesting.
Okay.
Okay.
And so you have people like Chuck Norris, right? Who's like a Christian martial artist. Okay. Or you have like lesbian martial artists. And so you can connect martial arts with, anything in American culture. So it's not framed as polarized, it's framed as like synthetic.
Okay.
And
But yoga
so,
took on a more spiritual sort of
right,
lens
as an
or
alternative to
reception.
Christianity,
Gotcha. Okay.
right,
Thank you.
Let me
right.
interrupt for one second. For you, Sean, or maybe another. Joseph Yee suggested we might use this as an occasion where we could record this, and this could be potentially used more generally. Can you use on your own screen when you're somehow recording the full, sometimes the full face of the speaker, and then maybe have the whole group, and the same time you can record if you're not doing so. You Sean, are you able to do that? I think if you send me a request and
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We can do this.
a request, I can say yes. Okay, here we go. You're requesting, I approve. Okay, I think you can now save to your computer your specific version, and I think you can reset the what's it called, the gallery, I believe, in the program. And so we can have the speakers face larger or smaller depending on whether you want it one or the other. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah, that makes sense. I'm already followed it. Okay.
Wonderful. Okay, so we're trying to bring this to the world as Joseph has participated in creating these ideas and this course to the world. So apologies for the interruption, but this is for spreading the word.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead, Joseph and Bella, for my apologies for the introduction.
Okay, so that's basically it. And then I actually had two more theoretical projects that I'm happy to share. But do any of you have any questions on my first project? Oh, so anyway, so Dan Silver and I, we did the yellow page data, and then later Chris Zul, Brazil, and I don't know if you know. Does your students know Chris? Brazil?
They don't.
Anyway, he's another U Chicago alum. So we did Robert Putnam's data on religious congregations, and so Bella or anybody here, can anybody guess what is the most racially mixed church in America? So the question is like, do you attend church with members of a different race? Okay, so which church members are the most likely to say yes? Can anybody guess? Okay. Oh, Sophie says Catholics. Okay. Catholics are actually very, yes, it's true. Catholics are actually racially diverse, but there's a group that is actually more diverse, and that can be I actually invited them as a guest speaker to one of my classes. It's actually the Jehovah's Witnesses. Right. So like the Jackson Five, I think the Williams sisters and Tennis, they're all used to be members of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And so again, this fits our theory, which is that you need an outsider hierarchy. And so historically, many churches in America were categorized as white churches or black churches. Okay, but then if you're not in the mainline denominations, whether you're Catholic, you're not mainline, or especially you're one of these kind of emerging, like non-denominational evangelical churches, you're much more likely to bring different races. And so you create a new religious identity that that kind of transcends this historical racial divide. And so like the Jehovah's Witnesses, they were the highest, maybe like 70, 80% claim to attend churches with another race. And not only that, they attend churches religiously. And so Jehovah's Witnesses are also among the most likely to claim friends of different races, especially people of lower economic classes. And so people who are high economic class, they don't really need church to meet people of different backgrounds, but people with less education, they rely more on church. And so people with less resources, so churches like Jehovah's Witnesses, Pentecostals offer this chance to form this interracial community. And so those were two publications, GSSR and Review of Religious Research. So that was project number one. But then, time moves on, and then I moved to Korea, and so I was in a different environment. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Professor Clark, can you make me a co-host so I can share my screen?
Yes, indeed. Should be working for you.
Okay, great. Works now. Okay, great. I'm gonna share my screen so everybody sees my screen, right? Okay. So the first project was Theory of Outsider Hierarchy. This was built with Professor Clark and I in Hyde Park, Chicago. And then I can apply it, for example, in the East Asian context, organizations that again combine high internal authority with outsider status are more likely to attract members across rival nations. And so the Unification Church, Sokogakka, and Jehovah's Witnesses attract more people across South Korea and Japan than do mainstream Christian or Japanese Buddhist organizations. Additionally, charismatic direct selling organizations like Amway also do more bridging between Koreans and Japanese. Okay, so that's my project number one. Now, project number two. Okay, can I get a volunteer to read this for me? Like, like to make this more interactive. Okay.
Number two.
Okay, yes. Lucas, go ahead.
Hello, okay. Theory of bounded exit and voice, which revises Hirschman's original exit voice formulation. When complete exit from the incumbent organization, in parentheses state, is highly costly, dissatisfied customers, citizens, maintain legal financial ties with the incumbent, even as they temporarily exit to alternative organizations, states. That is bounded exit. Bounded exit options in turn inform and motivate consumer voice in incumbent organizations.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lucas.
No problem.
Great. Lucas, where are you from?
I'm from Kentucky.
Okay, welcome. All right.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, so I'm in Korea now, and then I guess a good example might be the idea of like gay Christian teachers, right? So I'm sure, for example, like in Kentucky is a fairly conservative place, right? And so maybe if you're like LGBT, um, maybe it's not a good idea to be very vocal about being LGBT. Okay. On the other hand, maybe you're Kentucky proud, right? Okay. Go, it's the best state for basketball and other things. Maybe. I'm sure those from Indiana may disagree. Okay. And so the idea of bounded exit and voice means that you feel like, you feel bounded to Kentucky. There are many reasons why you don't want to exit Kentucky. And so but at the same time, you want to exercise voice, but you exercise voice in a bounded way, in a limited way. Okay. And so unlike Hirschman, I don't see this dichotomy between that you can only exercise between voice and exit, right? And so Hirschman said, I'm going to stop sharing now. Okay, so I can see all of you. So Hirschman famously did the theory of voice and exit. And so you can either stay and complain, voice, or you can get out, exit. And my theory is that, well, a lot of people today, exit is costly. So they stay, but they still exercise what I call bounded voice. And so we have a lot of, gay Christians who teach in Christian schools for different reasons. Partly because they say Christian people are very nice, okay? And then I feel more comfortable in Christian setting. At the same time, especially in South Korea, Christian schools are very conservative. And so Christian schools, many of them have kind of this don't ask, don't tell, okay? And so we're not gonna ask you about your private life, and you don't tell people about your private life. Okay. At the same time, as a gay Christian teacher, for example, Pablo, he's open to, like sometimes students bring it up during class or outside of class, and so he can, he can encourage such discussions. So he never starts the discussion, but encourages students to do it himself. And so by exercising this kind of bounded voice, he's kind of opening up space to discuss LGBT issues in Christian schools. This is like K to 12. I also see this with my Chinese students. Okay, I see at least one Chinese student. Do we have any students from China here? Okay, hello. Okay, how do you pronounce your name?
Yushen.
Yushen. Okay, and so Yushen, do you love China?
Definitely.
Okay, right. So again, a lot of students, they love China, but is China perfect? Is
It's
a
hard.
perfect place or not so perfect?
Not so perfect, I think.
Right, exactly, right. We have a saying like, nobody, only God is perfect, right? Nobody else is perfect. Okay, and so many of my students love China, but they think China is not perfect, and they want to make China better. But they do it like indirectly. Okay, and so you have many students and scholars from China, and they critique China, but in kind of indirect, bounded ways. And so there was this one case of like, this one professor, he taught classes on like ancient, Mongol politics from 1,000 years ago. Okay. And he used that class to kind of critique like, modern, Chinese politics today. And so a lot of students and scholars, they know how to kind of read between the lines. Okay. My third example might be like North Koreans in China. So you have a lot of North Korean migrants in China, but they don't want to. But they don't want to defect. They don't want to be a defector because defecting to South Korea means they lose all ties with their family members in North Korea. And so they stay in China. They claim to be loyal citizens of North Korea, uh, and, and 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 by doing so, by maintaining these contacts, they're exposed to more information. They make more money in China, and they use that information, they use that money to help open up North Korea. Okay, and so that's my theory of bounded exit voice. Okay, and then you can see. Let me share my screen again. Okay. Yeah, you can, and then I have other examples here. And then I'll email this to you guys. Okay, my third theory, okay. My third theory links political theory and comparative international politics. Okay, can I get a third volunteer?
Theory of discourse regimes and democratic vehemence links political theory.
And can you tell me your name, please?
I'm Rafi.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Rafi. Okay, go ahead.
The theory of discourse regimes and democratic vehemence links political theory and comparative and international politics. Proponents of liberal democratic values increasingly diverge on the relationship between procedural and substantive rights and norms. PRN refers to formal legal rights, such as free speech or due process, and non-legal norms, such as journalistic impartiality, associated with fair procedures in a liberal democracy. SRN refers to rights and norms associated with fair substantive outcomes, such as non-discrimination and equal dignity. Historically, most liberals, especially in the US and the UK, assumed a positive sum relationship. That is, the robust exercise of procedural rights does not does not impair substantive rights and may ultimately support substantive rights. But today, a growing number of militant or victim rights liberals see a zero-sum trade-off. They formally and informally restrict procedural rights and norms, such as free speech, to block allegedly illiberal actors from harming the dignity and equal participation of victimized groups. However, VR-oriented liberals disagree on who are the victims, as the political left and right each frames its side as the victim and the other side as the oppressor. As competing groups of left and right-wing VR liberals capture major societal institutions at the subnational and national levels, they enact competing sets of procedural rights and norm restrictions, such as that in California in Gavin Newsom, Florida DeSantis, Germany Schultz, and Hungary Willy Orban. The increasing divergence of democratic politics, democratic polities on procedural rights and norms impairs inter-polity cooperation and stokes mutual animus. Cooperation is especially difficult when one polity follows a VR hegemonic model that strictly restricts alternative information and viewpoints, and the other does not. South Korea, especially under progressive governments, strictly restricts alternative information and viewpoints on the Japanese colonial era, such as comfort women, and criminally prosecutes dissenting scholars, while Japan does not. Therefore, Korean elites frame Tokyo as a neo-fascist regime that denies war crimes, and Japanese elites frame Seoul as an authoritarian regime that censors academic dissent. South Korea still lacks bilateral security or free trade agreements with democratic Japan, even as it established a free trade agreement with autocratic China in 2015.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing so we can focus on looking at ourselves. So I think Yushan, you're from East Asia, and also Yushan, you heard of the comfort women controversy, right? The issue.
Yeah, I heard about that. That's our history class we are taking on. Yeah.
Right, so it's an important issue. Can you raise your hand if you heard about the comfort women issue? Okay, maybe one or okay, at least one. Okay. So as I was living in South Korea, I was wondering this interesting puzzle. According to, according to the democratic peace theory, South Korea and Japan, they're democracies, they should unite against autocracies like China. Okay. And number two, realist balancing theories that, if you're a middle power like South Korea, Japan, again, you want to ally, to protect yourself against, big hegemonic powers like China. But South Korea was not active according to these, according to IR theories. And so I was asking why. And so I connected international relations theories with political theory. Specifically, my argument is that liberalism is diverging today. That historically liberals supported things like what? Okay, Gavin, historically liberals supported things like what? All liberals support, we support freedom, including freedom of what?
I mean, just that's like an American ideal at the core of it is like freedom of speech and progressivism and those sort of
Right,
ideals, I guess.
exactly. Right. So if you're a liberal, that meant you supported freedom, including free speech. That's our fundamental right, First Amendment right. Okay. Uh, but these days, many self-identified liberals, both left and right, progressive liberals, conservative liberals, think that maybe speech is not good, that speech is harmful and should be restricted. Okay. And we see that on both progressives and conservatives, right? So like you have Ron DeSantis, he's saying like, critical race theory is bad. And I'm gonna ban it, not just in public schools, but also in private companies. So you have a Republican governor who's restricting free speech in the private sector. Do you see? And so this is like you see this dominant strain in both the Republican and Democratic Party that says speech should be restricted because we need to distinguish between good speech and harmful speech. Okay, uh, and my argument is that if you have two different speech regimes, okay, and say for example in South Korea, uh, has anyone seen like Korean drama or Korean videos? Okay, Luca. Okay, Luca, what have you seen?
So like I watched a lot of like the really dramatic ones, like the revenge stories like from Korea. Like I think I saw the show on Netflix called like The Glory, where this girl like gets revenge for being bullied.
Okay. Right. And a lot of these dramas, including I think the number one Korean movie last year was Exuma, right? And then so a lot of it talks about the Japanese colonial era. And so yeah, when I talk to like young students, both here in both South Korea and in America, so like a couple of weeks ago, I talked with a Korean American student who's like first year at Northwestern, right? And she was interested in the comfort women issue, and she said that my impression was that these women were not paid. Okay. Uh, and so if you live in Korea or if you're Korean American and you get most of your information from like, Korean drama, you think that Korean and Chinese comfort women were not paid. Okay? On the other hand, if you live in Japan or you read Japanese media, then you learn that most Korean comfort women and also many Chinese comfort women, they were paid. And not only were they paid, they received advance payments. Okay? Uh, and so that means that you have these two communities that have they have totally different information markets. Okay. So if you live in Japan, you're familiar with you get the information that these women were given advance payments. But if you live in Korea, you never get exposed to that. Okay. So you think that all these women were slaves. Okay. And you get very angry that Japan is not like repenting of its crimes. And so because Japan does not repent, it must be neo-fascist, right? And so, in progressive discourse, like fascist is worse than communist, right? And so it's better to ally with communist North Korea and China than with, fascist Japan. Right. And so you have people like progressive President Moon, the last president, who, he's the only Democratic leader I know that went to North Korea to hug Kim Jong-un. Do you see? And so he hugged Kim Jong-un and he declared solidarity with Xi Jinping. But he never met with the Japanese prime minister because for him, communist North Korea and China are more trustworthy than a fascist Japan. Um, And you get these different information markets because scholars who challenge the dominant narrative, such as Professor Song, he was sentenced to 6 months in prison. Professor Park Yu-ha, she was like, she was fined like 90 million won. That's like $60,000. Her book was censored, and prosecutors wanted to imprison her for 3 years. And so she was on trial for like the past 6 years. Okay. But fortunately for her, Korea elected a conservative president, and the Supreme Court decided not to convict her. Okay, but if the presidency changes to progressive, then maybe she'll be convicted again. So the bottom line is that most scholars and media, they never challenge the anti-Japan narrative because doing so means that you'll lose your job and maybe your freedom, that you might go to prison. Okay. And so, yeah, so nations, liberal democracies with different discourse regimes um, do not follow liberal IR theory. They do not have a democratic peace because they frame each other as illiberal. Okay, and so that's my third project. Okay, and so for example, Mr. Kai, hi, still there, right? Okay, so for example, students in China, they learn a lot about comfort women for the Japanese military, but they never learn about modern day comfort women, which is, for example, like North Korean women in China, okay, Northeast China. So a lot of these North Korean women, where they're modern day comfort women, they get advance payments to come to China and do sex work in Northern China, including non-legal marriages. And the only way they can come to China is through the complicity of Chinese border guards and local government officials. And so all local government officials know what's going on, but they look the other way. And so you see a lot of similarities between, North Korean women in China and, comfort women for the Japanese military. But again, Chinese students, you don't learn this at school. So Mr. Kai, so Have you heard about the North Korean women in China, or you never heard about it?
Yeah, actually, I never heard about this before.
Oh, you learned about this before in China, or where did you learn about this?
Yeah, actually, I never heard this before.
You heard about the North Korean women in China?
Yeah,
Oh, you never heard about this before.
yeah, I never heard this before.
Okay, sure, right. And so yeah, and so it's actually 30,000 North Korean women in China today. That's huge. Okay, that's actually more. That there might be actually be more than the North Korean. So you have 30,000 North Korean women who are in China right now. You have maybe 200 to 300,000 South Korean women who serve as comfort women for the U.S. military. And so practically all my Korean and Chinese students, they don't know about this history. They have different information markets than people in Japan, right? And so if you're a student in South Korea or China, you think Japan is the most evil country in the world because you don't realize that your country did the same thing. Okay, so those are my three projects. Just so I'm done. And again, I think as a social scientist, again, like depending on where I am, okay? So, Chicago, South Korea, having a lot of gay Christian friends, it kind of influenced me to kind of understand my world and to theorize, to better understand. And so I hope my experience can, inspire you to, I hope you guys can become great Chicago theorists yourself from your own Chicago school. So that's it. Thank you. Okay, Carrie, you're mute.
Apologies. Provocative indeed, as ever, Joseph. But let me let any of you to follow up with questions or provocative questions back to him or wherever we go. Let's have a little more free-ranging discussion. And I'll remind Joseph, who always, as you've seen in this session already, Joseph has a great talent for mobilizing and engaging discussion from all of us. And so, Joseph, if you want to help us do that today, please do.
Okay. Yes, Raphael.
Yeah. Do you think you see like these sort of contrasting liberal norms of discussion, like you mentioned with South Korea versus Japan? Do you see that in other contexts, maybe in like the West, like say how the South or versus the North approaches education about the Civil War? Like, could you draw any other parallels to that?
Oh, I think so. I think, the North and South about the Civil War, historically, there was different information markets. Uh, I think today, maybe instead of North and South, it might be, people who listen to CNN versus Fox News, right? So again, like, so like, so if you listen to Fox News, you know all about like the angel mothers, right? If you listen to CNN, you never heard of angel mothers. Do any of you heard of the angel mothers? Right. These are the mothers of children who were killed by illegal immigrants. Okay, and they formed this organization called Angel Mothers. And everybody who watches Fox News knows, but if you listen to CNN, you never heard. Right. Um, but I think that at the same time, like I think America is kind of polarized, but it's not as. But in other countries, it's a little worse because America is polarized, but other countries have what we call asymmetric polarization. Okay, that's the project that I'm working on now, asymmetric polarization. Uh, and so, has anyone heard about the martial law declaration in South Korea? Okay, right. And so, my theory of asymmetric polarization is that, when you have two groups that are highly polarized, okay, but it's asymmetric, so, one group has power and the other group does not. And so the group that has power marginalizes the other in legal ways. Okay, so right now in South Korea, the Progressive Party is dominant politically and especially culturally and intellectually. And so the Progressive Party, they did about 22 motions to impeach the president, the officials from the presidential administration, and they also cut his budget. And so they basically paralyzed the presidency. And so President Yoon, from his perspective, I need to do whatever necessary to regovern. And so in asymmetric polarization, the dominant group uses, legal methods to dominate the opponents. And then the weaker party, they use radical and sometimes violent means to protest. And so you see this with, President Yoon supporters in South Korea. And you also saw this with President Trump supporters on January 6th, right? You think that, if you think that America is polarized, but you are the weaker party, you don't have any voice, you're being oppressed, then you're willing to do like radical and violent means. Okay. And so, yeah, that's my, and, and so you see that, I think you see that in other contexts as well, such as Germany, right? So in Germany or Romania, you have like so you have what we call like the progressive establishment versus like the Nazi right wing. Okay. So if you're framed as Nazis, whether you're alternative for Germany or the leading candidate for president in Romania, you're seen as a bad person, and so your speech should be restricted. Right. And so that's asymmetric. And so if you're a supporter of the alternative for Germany or the presidential candidate in Romania, you're much more likely to act in a radical way. Okay, because of this asymmetric polarization. America today used to be asymmetric, but now it's more symmetric, right? And so now you see President Trump and his supporters doing all these crazy things, but they follow the law, right? Like, Elon Musk and Dodge. And so, they might be doing crazy things, but technically, they claim to be following the law. Okay. And so the only way to block what they're doing is through the courts. Okay. Okay. I hope that answers your question. Okay. Thank you. Sure. Okay. Love to hear from everybody else. Like, if you haven't spoken, love to hear you, I'd love to hear your bounded voice or unbounded. Yes, Gavin?
Yeah, so I just had a question. I actually visited South Korea when I was a little bit younger and went to a large evangelical mega church, so-called. And I was kind of wondering how you see these evangelical churches, how they like what their social function is in society as opposed to in the US. Like, do you think these Korean mega churches kind of serve a similar bridging function, or are they more socially insular?
Oh, that's a good question. So the evangelical churches in Korea has evolved historically. So okay. Oh, hold on a sec. I think my mother's visiting me.
He's done some papers about evangelical churches in North Korea, and they're not illegal. They're actively present in North Korea in interesting ways. That he is playing with these kinds of things, but many think don't exist or cannot exist. So keep drawing him out. I'm just mentioning, Joseph, that you've done some work on evangelical churches in North Korea, which is not what many people are writing papers about.
Oh, sure. Yes. So every year I donate money to Christian missionaries who work legally in North Korea. They founded the first Christian university in North Korea, which is called Pyongyang University of Science and Technology. So yeah, I'd love to talk to you about that. They also founded the first surfing camp in North Korea. Okay, so if you Google North Korea surfing, you can see my friend Gabe Sigoin. Okay, but anyway, going back to the earlier question. Historically, like the Christian churches were considered like outsiders, right? And so there were this outsider hierarchy. And so it was one of the few organizations that united all different classes of society, right? Because historically Korea was very much divided by class. During the Joseon Dynasty, can anyone guess what percentage of the population was enslaved? Okay. Anyway, Joseon Dynasty, this was before the Japanese era. 30% of the population was enslaved from like the 13th to 18th century. Okay. Only in the 19th century did Korea open up and so you had this huge divide. Like, people who are like upper class, they wouldn't talk to people from lower class, and especially those who were descended from slaves. But church brought everybody together under the same God. And so it was this really like bridging, modernizing institution. And it was not a surprise that, many, if not most, political activists, businessmen, entrepreneurs, they came from the Christian church. So it was a revolutionary institution. But today, what was revolutionary 100 years ago is the establishment today. Okay. And so now uh, Christians are heavily criticized by many progressives as being like anti-LGBT, as being too conservative. The Korean word for Christians is called 기독교. Critics call them 개독교. You mean like dogs. 개 means dog, okay? And so that's an insult in Korean. Uh, and so these days, it's like, I think it's very analogous to what's happening in America. Churches used to unify, but now it's seen as kind of like part of the cultural divide. Okay. And so these days I study a lot of kind of like emerging churches and new and kind of like outsider churches that's trying to do, that's kind of try to do like the old bridging functions. If you're interested, next month I invited a scholar who studies the Shincheonji Church in South Korea. It's kind of like this new up church, which was heavily prosecuted during the COVID-19 crisis. Okay, I hope that addresses your question. Thank you. Okay, great. Can I hear from other people? Maybe like Haley or Jack or Sophia? Love to hear from all of you. If you don't have a question, just say your name and where you're from, and how do you like Chicago so far?
I'm Jake.
Oh,
I'm from California. And I mean, in terms of weather, I hate Chicago. At least, relative to California, but the city is amazing. I mean,
mhm.
I don't think you could get better than what it is. So,
Right. Which part of California?
Southern California, Orange County.
Oh, oh yeah, right. My family lives in Fullerton. That was my mother just
Oh,
dropping off
really?
some, yeah, food and things. Right. So, okay. Yeah, so Chicago's great. It's like Seoul. You can actually walk around. So I like that, walking urban city. Okay. Great. Okay, Jake, if you don't have a question, you want to popcorn somebody new so they can introduce each other?
Sure. Um, let's go with Gavin Ashman.
Okay.
Yeah, so I am actually also from Orange County, Southern California. So similar, very similar experience to Jake, in that I like the city a lot. Still not quite used to the weather, and I don't think I ever will be, but really enjoy Chicago in the springtime when it starts warming up. So,
Yes, the never-ending winter. Right.
yep,
But
exactly.
spring's great, and always love, swimming at Lake Michigan. It was fun. Okay. Okay. You want to popcorn someone else?
Sure. How about Haley?
Hi, I'm Haley. I'm from Florida.
Okay, another warm state. Great.
Yeah.
All right. Do you want to tell me something fun about your life or or any question from my presentation?
Well, I guess I'm from a pretty small town in Florida, not really like Orlando that you would think of, whatever, like
Mhm.
more like a farm town. Um, so I guess what was interesting, just like something random, I guess, but as compared to Chicago, I think it was really interesting to see the transition of community from like a small town to a large town
Mhm.
because it's what was shocking to me was that there seems to be like a lot more community here than in like my small community that I came from. Um, and a lot more extension into like different areas of life together, like people supporting other groups, whatnot. So yeah.
Oh, do you have an example in mind?
Um, I guess for example, like I well, like diversity wise, my town was very much like everyone was all the same.
Mm-hmm.
And you would there were like there was people there were like there was diversity, but the majority would just ignore it. As compared to like here, um, there's so many like programs in place. And for example, I'm majoring in human rights. That's one of my majors. So I think it's very interesting to see the like social effort here to like uplift everyone as compared to like back home where you would just like ignore anyone different from you.
Okay. All right. That's great. Thank you. Do you want to popcorn someone?
Um, let's see. Um, how about Jake? Has he gone?
Yeah, I just went.
Okay. Sorry. The names are getting mixed up. Okay, how about I think everyone's talked, but we can go back to Lucas.
Okay. Then maybe Lucas, you have the last word.
Hello, my name is Lucas, and I'm from Kentucky. Specifically, I grew up mainly in Lawrenceburg, but I was born in the capital of Kentucky, Frankfurt. And first of all, I just want to say, Joseph, thank you so much for joining us today. So rarely do you get to talk to like an author of one of your assigned readings. So like I really appreciate you joining us today. And I have a question about what you said earlier. You said that like around like 30,000 North Korean women currently reside in China.
Yes.
And that confused me a little bit because, like, the information market, like where I was fed, like, North Korea is described as like virtually inescapable. It's like
Mm-hmm.
if you leave, you're going to die. Like, I read this one author, Yeonmi Park, I think was her name. It was her memoir was called "In Order to Live," and she described like the grueling trials that she had to endure to escape North Korea. About how like a lot of her family was executed, and about like like the conditions that she suffered while in North Korea, like with abject poverty and all that. So I want to know like to what extent is that true, and is like North Korea like really difficult to escape, and also like did those like most of those 30,000 women who like went to China, like was that on their like own volition, or was that like an order to put them there?
Right, right. Okay, good questions. One is that the book by Miss Park, it's actually a controversial book. And so as a social scientist, you want to be very careful about popular narratives on controversial topics. And so her book was published by like conservative media. And so
Mm-hmm.
conservative media tends to say a lot of things about like China, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and and so sometimes the things they say may be like empirically corroborated and sometimes not,
And
right?
sensationalized too.
Right, sensationalized, right? So the author mentioned that when she was a girl, she went to a stadium and, she saw her like a mother's best friend being executed for watching a Hollywood movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then other defectors said, that never happened, right? Or at least they never heard of it. Uh, and so as social scientists, we wonder why. Like, when you say something that is not supported by the data, it means that either it's true, but, the evidence is covered up, you're lying for different reasons. Or what's the third possible reason why you may say something that is not empirically corroborated?
For attention, for clout, for
Well, but then
to
you're
start your
assuming that
career.
she's lying, right? She's doing it for like kind of these other reasons, right?
I don't have enough information though to like
Sure,
come to a conclusion.
right. So the third motivation is what we call false memories, right? That you basically you end up believing what you want to believe, okay? Or you end up, so like you, so a lot of, you say what people want to hear, and then over time you believe in what you're actually saying. And so as social scientists, we're very careful about like what is empirically corroborated versus not when it comes to sensitive topics like North Koreans in China, or North Koreans, or Koreans in Japanese military that comfort women. Okay, how much of it is like true, but it's not, but the evidence is covered up. They're lying for different reasons, or it's just false memories, manipulated memories. Okay. That's part one. Part two is that North Korea today is very different from what it was in the 1980s. 1980s, North Korea was really closed down. But something happened in the early 90s. Does anybody know? You had this massive, it might have been in Youngmi's book, but you had this huge famine, right? It was like the Chinese Great Leap Forward, or where you had maybe 5% of the population died, maybe more. Okay, and so for people to survive, they had to flee to China. And so like the border guards, they just said, just go. Okay, so the order, so since the mass famine, since the collapse of communism, the things are not as tight as they used to be. And so the North Korean government, as long as you don't openly get political and oppose the regime, they basically just look the other way. Okay, because you have these 30,000 North Koreans, 70% are women, maybe 60% are doing sex work. They're funneling a lot of money back to China, back to North Korea. Okay, and so this money supports the North Korean regime. And so as long as you're not doing anything political, they were looked the other way. Okay. Okay, great. Uh, oh, Lucas, can you maybe popcorn Mr. Kai?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Kai, would you like to share with the class?
Yes, maybe a little bit about where you're from, or what you're either maybe talk about where you're from or where you want to go in the future.
Oh,
Yeah. Yes.
yeah. I'm Yushan, and actually, I'm currently second year competition social science master student. And
Hmm.
actually, my research is more related like urban informatics, and also like to identify people's like activity or urban scheme in the by using a computational methods uh, during the urban environment. Uh, so it's not very not very like theoretical things, but more focus on how to understand people's relation between like his people's perception or behavior related with the
Hmm.
urban environment. So
Sure. That sounds fine. What are your future goals? What do you want to do with that?
yeah, actually, for my research purpose, I try to combine like large language model and or combine like a lot of different resources such like video or text information. We can identify some we can like fix the traditional research methods cannot limitation. So we can understand like how people's really activity in currently urban environment. So that's kind of like and also maybe deploy the like small large language model in some sensor device, and we can like collect a lot of different a lot of like local environment data and support to support like urban designer or policymaker
Okay.
to do this issue.
Okay, I hope to hear from your presentation and hope you publish something soon. Okay.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, maybe we can popcorn Terry. Terry, you have any last words before we finish?
This has been changing a little bit of roles and consciously or unconsciously, it's all the more diverse and fun. I would say we're just linking with some of your local and Chicago neighborhood book, which is book and many of the issues in the book tend to be very local and South Side. What you're doing now is global, international, and I've invited to this class. I've invited a couple of the IR professors in political science to come. In particular, Mearsheimer, and Mearsheimer has been very much in the news over Ukraine and the role of the Russians, sort of siding, if you will, or I won't say siding, articulating and presenting the Russian perspective on Ukraine and on international relations. And thus he's been very popular in Moscow, but he's also, at least not just named by himself, but by many as doing VIR theory. Proximity, military dominance, economic dominance was everything. He then has added nationalism, but basically he's smart. He's a smart person. He recognizes many things that don't fit, that don't include these things, such as he's done a book on Israeli lobbyists in Washington, D.C. And so what Joseph is doing by invoking in a systematic way the idea, we could call it ideology, we could call it culture, we could call it political culture, and the things which include we could call more crystallized, as some of the political scientists studying public opinion. Philip Converse will talk about Norman Nye and Sidney Verba more recently will talk about the crystallization of opinions. And so how much are things crystallized at all? And so Converse initially pointed out that, 93% of Americans say inconsistent things about being right or left at the beginning of the end of a questionnaire. That is, they contradict themselves. And do they favor unions? Do they favor more government? Do they want more welfare state? That is even to say things which are consistent to yourself suggests that these are not salient kinds of. So measuring these kinds of things that Joseph he's been talking about today is excellent, I would say, as it's a core theme within political science, but it's not just political science. I went to a big conference in Israel, and for the Israelis, not just an IR person, but the war, which you're in the middle of now, that is the bringing in what Joseph has done today and talking about this, and how martial arts can feed into and support one or another kind of perspective, as fostering more tolerance, as you gave the examples and wrote about the mother and the daughter, the mother and the son, adult mother and a 12-year-old son, whatever. If he didn't do his homework, he'd have to do push-ups in front of everybody else in the martial arts. That is, having this kind of strong ideology as an alternative way of not just talking about power or the power elite, which may have been done in the growing out of the group theory kind of tradition within political science. But what I'm pleased to see in what Joseph has done today is to move to an international level. That is, you're challenging, you're systematizing. You're not just doing a journalistic stuff. You're adding potential components, which someone who's seriously, as an IR student or young researcher, creative researcher, young or old, ought to pay attention to this. And I'm sure if this hasn't happened yet, I'm sure it will be more. One bit of evidence is I go to receptions of the IR folks, and I ask the students how many of the students are now actively following John Mearsheimer. And 20 years ago, 80%. Now it's about 20 to 30%. That is, most of the IR students no longer are following Mearsheimer anymore. So in this sense, they're looking for new things. So what the questions you're asking from Bella's questions from a perspective which you may think about broader implications, but these are not just ideological. These can be ideological, if you will, but they can also be themes which social scientists and IR folks can strengthen their analytical framework, going beyond the factors which Mearsheimer has stressed in the past. So I would say, Joseph, cheers in moving to a broader. I mean, you've been with Tocqueville and other frames. You've done this in the past, but you're doing this in new ways. But using hierarchy and authority and asymmetrical, as you talked about it, or less asymmetrical, these are excellent and useful kinds of analyses to codify in a creative, original way, as you've done, the ideas which have come down a little bit from Verba, from Coleman and Verba, Almond and Verba, etc., through Parsons, through Max Weber and others. These are fine as background, but we need to get more specific and contemporary, and you're doing exactly that. So it's cheers in doing that. And the students have illustrated and extended some of these through the discussion or questions as you nicely have. So thank you for joining us. Let me turn back to Joseph if you have any concluding observations.
Thank you for the kind words, Terry. I think Vice President Vance went to Europe and he criticized the Europeans for censoring the conservatives, right? And I think that links really well to my theory on discourse regimes. That again, like, Europeans and Americans are diverging on what they believe a true democracy should be, right? And because so to the extent that Republicans think that Europeans are censoring conservatives, I think the transatlantic alliance is going to suffer. And so I think this helps to explain many of the challenges in IR today, and informing some of the challenges forming into the Kantian vision of this union of democracies. So anyway, my dog is waiting for me. So thank you again. I think I'm gonna leave soon, so you guys can finish up your discussion. Okay, thank you guys. Good luck. Go Phoenix. Go Chicago. All right.
Thank you.
Go Joseph. All right. Well, we're near the end, but any last word that anyone wants to add? Let me just preface and say we're looking for next week, as it says in the syllabus. This is the end now, as we've seen today, feeding into the rest of next week, is where and how we can bring in any interesting, lively activities. This can be someone doing a student paper who's now registered in the course, people who've done that in the past, such as Dan Silver or Joseph Yee. And there are others like that. And some of these we have in videos. And so, I'm looking for things like that. But if anyone has a particular suggestion or person who we might engage for this kind of discussion, please let me know. But especially if any of you are thinking, so Bella, and I think, was it Gavin? or Jake mentioned that you might have potential ideas for some kind of paper. That is, it doesn't have to be a single serious theme topic, 20 pages, but we recommend as a full page paper. You can do one memo, a series of memos, and if there are other things a little bit like that, please let me know, and we'll try to make a place either publicly with the rest of the class, or privately if you want to do it more just as more informally and casually. The anything else that anyone has a suggestion or question that is especially continuing next week, but otherwise about the course more generally.
Hi, I got a question about the final. So will the layout be similar to like the midterm? And also, have we decided on like an official date yet?
Sean, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, we still like care about people's like, schedule for about his final week. So we may have like two options for each people. Like you can choose each one based on your availability. So I will post the official date maybe late this week, so you can get the information.
But in terms of the format for the questions, is the quick answer is yes, it will be similar to the midterm. With some ID things at the beginning and an essay at the end of it, and the same division of time and importance in terms of the grade will be the same, roughly. I think 40% for the IDs and 60% for the essay. So it's quite open compared to many courses. We're not trying to, pin you down for one or two or a handful of specific, very esoteric terms. We want to give you an opportunity to write about things that you know about and to compose and talk about that thoughtfully. And so there are many ways you can do that and get a strong grade.
So I'm assuming that there will also be a review session for the final next week.
Yes,
Like
that's our normal. However, based on often, I would say not just here, but more generally, if we don't have that many discussions, I will have a couple of things in my pocket, especially like videos from other people, like Joseph. I won't say nobody is like Joseph, but let's say other people who've worked on some of the kinds of issues we've covered in the course. We can bring some of those in, but yes, we will. Well, most of all, we will have a review session, and it's welcome to present. And we had I would say we had a distinctly interesting session in the review before the midterm. So congratulations, and let's aim for that if we can. Anything else? All right. Why don't we officially close? Bella, you and I had talked about possibly talking about your themes, but we also have you Sean, and we talked about having a meeting afterward on your project, but as one of our two participants here has been ill, and so he's not here today. So I don't know if we should if you Sean, do you have things with the project or other things which you'd like to talk about even with you here now alone, or what are your thoughts in terms of Bella? That is, should I can talk with Bella separately another time or later, or if that is Johan, I know you've been working so hard with other things, including especially grading the midterm. But if you have things that you'd like to talk about, yeah. Well, let me. Why don't we turn off the recording for now, and we can continue that if you want for a separate. Where's my cursor going here? We can do it separately. Now this one, if we turn on the, I'm pretty sure this is